Hey there, how's it going? If you look at the games I make, you can probably see that I really like pixel art. The NES, SNES, and the Game Boy were the systems that I had during my core gaming experiences growing up. So I guess it makes sense that now that I make games, I tend to make 2D sprite-based pixel art games, because to me, when I think of what a game is, I go to the platformers from the early 90s, things like Mario 2, 3, World, as well as Mega Man and Mega Man X, and plenty more. Let me know in the comments what your core games were growing up that still pop up when someone says game. Also, the algorithm demands that I let you know. While you're at it, you should click the subscribe button and ring the bell. So all of that was a really roundabout way of saying that I've seen a lot of people making some pretty cool pixel art stuff lately, and I want to try it too. I don't normally make pixel art as art, and what I mean by that is I don't usually make art to just share. I'm usually always making sprites with some sort of purpose to go into a larger project. I realized I kept bringing this up while I was on my stream lately, so I decided I'd finally give it a try and actually see if I could make some art for the sake of making art that looked cool. It's so weird, everything's been interactive for so long, the thought of making something to just look at it seems a little weird. I also get a good amount of questions from people asking how I make pixel art or how I approach making pixel art, so hopefully this can be helpful to other people by seeing my progress. Okay, so I know I want to make something, but now the really hard part, trying to figure out what to actually make. I'm really bad at this. If you give me a blank canvas, I will sit and stare at it for hours without knowing what to make. But I do really like restrictions and challenges, so I figured I would give myself one that I knew I wouldn't really like, but I think would be fun to explore. So I'm tasking myself with one of my least favorite color palettes, the 4-color Game Boy color palette. If you do like the Game Boy color palette, please take this as my subjective opinion. I just really don't like it. And this is coming from someone who played a ton of Game Boy growing up. I had the original, the clear purple, the pocket, the color, but I have no nostalgia love for that green screen, unfortunately. But from an art perspective, just working in the shades of green presents a pretty fun challenge. Only having 4 colors max requires you to think a bit differently about making sure that everything is readable on your screen. So since I'm doing the Game Boy Color on a Game Boy size screen, I thought it might be fun to see what my game Monkeys with Guns could have looked like had it been made on the Game Boy. So that's my challenge set. Let's see how it goes. I opened up Sprite and loaded in the built-in Game Boy color palette and set a canvas size of 160 pixels wide by 144 pixels tall. Knowing where to start is always difficult. Here, I began by blocking in the spikes to see how much area I will actually have to play with once they're in. After roughing in the spikes, I went to make the blocks do the level layout, but I quickly realized I didn't know what size I was going to need. Figuring out the monkey's size and look was probably more important. Luckily, I've been making these monkeys for a good while now, and I'm pretty accustomed to translating their shape and size down to something a little bit smaller. Here they end up being about half the size of the original. Adding the guns to the monkeys ended up being a bit tricky because it was just kind of looking like a big dark blob right in the middle of them. After trying a couple of different approaches, it made more sense to just give the monkeys larger guns and not give them the pistol. That way the silhouette of the guns would be more easily readable to the viewer. With the monkeys made, it's time to take a look at the blocks again. Now I have a better understanding of what size they should be in relation. I've made them fairly simple to not be too distracting, and I did definitely think that I was making them look more like the destructible blocks from the underwater section of Super Mario Land, but it turns out when I went to look I was way off. It's the thought that counts. Now to give the spikes a bit more definition. I gave them an outline to help them pop and stand out from the background, as well as some rivet-looking shapes along the side to not just have a giant solid color bar. Threw some highlights on the high spots to give even more separation, and we're pretty much good. I don't often use the mirror drawing tool in Sprite, but it came in really handy, making it so that I only had to make one side of the spikes. Okay, so now we have the basic components of the scene. It's time to lay out the level. To add a little more interest, I wanted to make the spikes breaking at least one block like they do in the game. So I made some block chunks and smoke to make it feel like it just broke. The blocks up top look a little bare, so I added the heart pickup from the game where the players could regain their health. With that in, I now have a large hole in the upper right portion of the composition. Luckily, another key feature of Monkeys with Guns is the falling gun crates. The crate and the parachute weren't too bad to put together, but they were a little finicky to just get looking right. And the parachute gave me a headache for a little bit. But after tweaking and adjusting, I think it looks pretty good. This is a good example of how when people ask me how to make good pixel art, I usually just say to just keep messing with it until it looks right. Since I'm trying to make a game scene, the players need their UI with a life bar. Funnily enough, I changed the life bar to look more like it did in the early prototypes I had of Monkeys with Guns, where it's a pellet style system as opposed to a continuous bar. I just feel that at this size, it's more easily readable to see the health bar when it's broken up into segments. To add some more interest and action to the scene, I made the right monkey shooting, and I spent way too long trying to make that smoke look good. And the last main element to add is the timer that sits at the top of the screen. I consider it one of the most important parts of the game because when it hits 0, that means the spikes are showing up. Funnily enough, you wouldn't think that a 0 would be so finicky, but it took a bit to get this one to look right. I'm not sure why. And then last but not least is the background. My apologies for the jump. I paused the recording to do some family stuff and I didn't restart it right away when I sat back down. You only miss me hiding the layers and making this brick grid, which is fairly standard. To not have the background be too stiff, I softened up all of the corners of the bricks and I added in a dithering effect to the top of them to just give them a little bit more definition and depth without having to add any more colors. And this part ended up being long, tedious, and boring, so we'll skip to the end. With the dithering, it all looks a bit too uniform, so I go through and I start erasing parts of it and adding in some cracks to just break up the sameness. I added another projectile coming from the other monkey as well because it would only make sense that if the other one's firing, this one probably should be too. I did some quick touch up to the numbers and that's it. This is my take of what monkeys with guns would look like on the Game Boy. I'm sure it doesn't follow all the actual sprite rules and restrictions, but I like it, and I couldn't just leave it there. The next night, I started playing around with the idea of animating this. This is another area that I haven't really dabbled in before. My sprite animations are typically 4 frames because they're meant to be quick little loops, but building out a whole scene animation like this was pretty fun, I have to say. Luckily, I kept all of the elements on different layers, so all I had to do was animate them individually one at a time. Now, this is not a fast process. This is pretty slow and pretty tedious. Sprite allows the preview window on the right to constantly play the animation, while I work on individual frames on the left. To make the animation work, there was a few new things that I had to make, like extra numbers for the countdown, as well as the win message at the end of the round, the player death, a couple of other things. It took me a little while to figure out how I was going to make the whole thing loop though. And since there's no clean way to do it seamlessly, I decided to go with the end of level transition from the game. After a winner's declared, it zooms itself into the camera and then zooms itself back out to reset the GIF. And here's what the final animation looks like. For being my first attempt at an overall animated pixel art scene, I'm pretty happy with it. Sadly, I don't have an actual Game Boy, let alone the ability to put this on there to check it out, but I do have the magic of video editing software, and wow, look how cool that looks. I had a lot of fun with this, and I'd really like to do more pixel art videos in the future, and I really want to do some that aren't all green. Speaking of which, let's pull the actual black and white of this and see how it feels. Ah, much better, but it pulls a lot less at the nostalgia heartstrings. If you enjoyed this and would like more pixel art related videos, please let me know down in the comments. And for those that wanted to know, I hope this gives a bit of insight on how I approach creating art with tiny squares. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'd like to give an extra special shout out to my amazing Patreon supporters, especially Abishan, Claude13, Daniel Martin, David Scott, Huntrump, Nightfall, Kevin Halgau, Kirby, Kormai, Liam Sorta, MLK, Motzi Makes, Nazar Salim, Salty Pretzel, Scott Hansen, Soapy Gnome, and Straight Up Gruntled. You're all awesome people, and I really can't thank you enough for all the support. If you want to see more pixel art or just want to get in touch, come say hi over at my live stream at twitch.tv/Vimlark, or you can message me on Twitter or join the Discord with a lot of other really cool people. I hope you're all healthy and safe wherever you are, and I'll talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.